Much indeed. Peter Hitchens.
Thank you. Good evening. The last time I had to debate this was with a gentleman called Russell.
Would you mind being seated for the purposes of the
I would mind immensely. I can only speak standing up. And I'll start again too. If I'd been told I had to be seated, you should say so first. I'm sorry. The last time I did this was a debate with a gentleman, a person called Russell Brand, an alleged comedian, whose ravings on the subject were beyond incoherent. I had expected better than this tonight. And when I heard that Mr. Snowden was an expert on dodgy statistics, I assumed that meant that he was against them. He's just told us that thousands of people have died as a result of the Misuse of Drugs Act. I wonder how that's been achieved. I'd like to give you some undodgy statistics because I think it's very, very important from the start we understand that when we're dealing here with the main and most dangerous drug in this country, cannabis, the allegedly soft drug which is cramming the locked wards of our mental hospitals with irreversibly damaged young people, that when we're dealing with that we must understand that this is a new phenomenon in our society, not like alcohol, which was introduced so many thousands of years ago nobody can tell, not even like cigarettes, whose use was largely promoted by the three great wars of the 20th century, but really, really new. In the whole year of 1945, 4 persons were convicted of cannabis possession in the entire United Kingdom. That's including England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. There's obviously a serious crime wave between 1945 and 1950 because by then it had risen to 79. 1955 it had hit 115. 235 in 1960 and 626 in 1965. Then something happened. It's called the Cultural Revolution, when people began to think that drug taking, particularly cannabis smoking, was cool. The figure doubled to over 1,000, and in 1967 to 2,393. Then in 1971, we passed, and this was a bipartisan act. As far as I know, no other act of Parliament can claim this distinction, that it has been put through Parliament by the Home Secretaries of both major political parties in the course of a year. And it fell in 1970 because the 1970 election was then put through by the Conservative government, which had defeated the Labour Party in June of 1970, exactly the same form. So the Home Secretary who had tried to put it through under Labour was the Shadow Home Secretary who had to more or less support it when the Conservatives put it through, one James Callaghan. When this law went through, the laws against cannabis possession were effectively reduced to very nearly nothing. And this was formalised by the Lord Chancellor, that well-known radical revolutionary Lord Hailsham, who told the Magistrates Association in October 1973 to stop sending anyone to prison for cannabis possession. An instruction they have since very diligently obeyed. Now remember, 1945, 4 convictions. Okay, 2009, in England and Wales alone, I have no figures for the rest of the United Kingdom, 163,000 cannabis arrests in this country. Now, 19,137 of those were dealt with through cautions, which expire after 3 months and need not normally be declared to employers. 11,492 resulted in something called a penalty notice for disorder, an on-the-spot rebuke, which generally results in no punishment. A mere 22,478 cases ended up in court, as far as I can discover, because they were connected to other charges. The most significant figure was that 86,593 were dealt with by a procedure known as a cannabis warning. Cannabis warning doesn't actually exist in English law. It's never been legislated by Parliament. It's simply been decided by the police that this is what they will do. The Association of Chief Police Officers advises all their forces that what they should do if they catch anybody in possession of this illegal drug is let them off. That is it. No legislation has ever been through Parliament to legitimise this. They just do it. That is to say, I could not trace, because neither the Ministry of Injustice nor the Home Office were able to provide me with details of what happened to all the others. So presumably they forgot about them. They might as well have done for all the good it would have done. You might also note the case of Mr. Peter Doherty, who appeared in court about a year ago, I think, while he was actually leaving the courtroom, dropped on the floor of the court building several wraps of heroin. Mr. Doherty already had 21 convictions for heroin possession, and he was not then either imprisoned or held by the police. He was bailed and appeared a few months later, and for having appeared in a courtroom with a Class A illegal drug in his pockets, he was fined. So if there is a war against drugs in this country, you'll have to tell me exactly where it's taking place. Those of you who are interested might also look up the case of the Rousing couple who walked into the United States Embassy in possession of cocaine. They also were not imprisoned. I can, if you like, go through figures, and I will later on if anyone wants them, on the disposals of cases of possession and indeed possession with intent for sale and sale of cocaine and heroin, the supposedly serious drugs. But the facts all point in the same direction. Since the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, there has been no serious attempt to prosecute possession of drugs. As a consequence, in my view, possession of drugs in this country has become much, much more widespread. To pretend otherwise is simply ludicrous. Now, if the arguments which are put forward by the decriminalisers and legalisers are true, what they're saying is that we are in the terrible position we're in now because for so long we have been fighting. Simon Jenkins incessantly, wherever he can find a platform, writes this over and over again. What we're supposed to have been doing during the past 30 or 40 years is to have waged this bitter, terrific prohibition against cannabis and other drugs. So unfair, so unkind. And this has been a failure. And as a result of this, we must give up having any laws against cannabis at all. This would work as an argument had we been enforcing the law. Since we haven't been, the causes of whatever crisis we have at the moment cannot conceivably lie in the excessive or overzealous enforcement of a law which we have abandoned the enforcement of. Now, there are other points made about this. The word prohibition, let me now address, if I can only find my notes on it, Mr. Snowden's alleged case here. If that is a mobile phone, I believe in the death penalty. And I'm quite prepared, as I'm often asked, to exercise it myself if necessary. Equal opportunity executioner. Doesn't matter what colour you are, how rich you are, I'll do it. So prohibition, we get this all the time. What do we mean by prohibition? Am I a utopian? Do I believe that a law against the possession of cannabis will immediately end the possession of cannabis by everybody? Do I believe that we can have a drug-free society? Of course I do not. What I believe is that the law functions as a deterrent. Most crucially, it functions as a deterrent in the lives of the young, who are under enormous peer pressure and pressure from that vast advertising organisation known as the rock music industry to supposedly experiment with drugs. These experiments which they undertake, of course, don't involve the taking of notes or controls or placebos, and quite why they're dignified with the term experiment, I do not know. But what I do know is that an increasing number of them end in tragedy. And those of you who doubt this should read the tremendously moving book recently published by Patrick Cockburn and his son Henry, Henry's Demons, which is an account of what happened to somebody who I know and have known for many years was one of the most brilliant boys I've ever come across, and who is now, I'm afraid, in a terrible state on heavy antipsychotic medication and will be, I think, for the rest of his life, transformed his life in many ways a ruin, only not so because of the enormous love and devotion which his parents have given towards looking after him, but disastrously interrupted because he believed the stupid lie that cannabis is a soft drug. What do we mean soft drug? When we say soft drink, do we mean a drink with not much alcohol in it? No, we mean a drink with no alcohol in it. Cannabis, far from being in some way softer than heroin and cocaine, is capable, and the correlation in this is so devastating that it is extraordinarily foolish to ignore it, is capable of overthrowing the mind of the person who smokes it forever, especially if he is a young person. Anything, it seems to me, anything which deters people 12, 13, 14, the kind of people who are now increasingly smoking cannabis in our lawless society, anything which deters them from risking their sanity seems to me to be worth a try. This is not utopian. And then there's this fanciful rubbish. Oh, we could never build enough prisons to hold all the people who would smoke cannabis in defiance of the law. Well, what drivel this is. I mean, in a sense, ladies and gentlemen, all crime is caused by law. Burglary wouldn't be a crime if it weren't illegal. But that doesn't mean that it's not wrong. We make laws against things because they're damaging, dangerous, and unpleasant. And the use of cannabis is damaging, dangerous, and unpleasant, sometimes for the person who uses it. In many, many cases, and let's just get over John Stuart Mill before we go any further, in many, many cases, it's far more damaging for those who love that person have to look after him or her for the rest of his ruined life. So do not imagine this is just a matter of I must have control over my own body. The law has no right to tell me what to do. You be the parent, the brother, the sister, the child of somebody who's ruined his life by smoking drugs, or indeed by smoking tobacco. You be the relative, the close relative of one of those people, and say, it's an individual decision, it affects no one but me, it's only my property. The law is a very, very powerful deterrent against this sort of selfish folly. It's a very powerful force against the awful peer pressure, the endless plugging of drugs as an acceptable lifestyle choice by worthless rock musicians and stupid comedians. It is vital that we actually restore it for the sake of people you know, and people who you know who may in their lives face terrible tragedy because we have failed to enforce and do not actually anymore have any laws against drugs in this country.